Hello, Dickinsonians. This is Annie Condas, Associate Dean in the Center for Advising Internships and Lifelong Career Development. Thank you for joining me today for our Interviewing 101 webinar. This is a little different for me. I'm actually broadcasting from my home office, so I'm hoping that my internet is quality enough for you all to not be interrupted. So this is my first time. I've been doing some Zoom from home, meeting with students and alumni, but this is my first time working with the webinar system from home. So I apologize if anything's choppy or if things aren't working. I'm sure many of you are also tuning in from your cell phones or from your home offices because of everything that's going on. So I wish you well and staying healthy during this time. I did change up my PowerPoint a little bit, my program a little bit and workshop, because I did want to address what's kind of going on with the career landscape as it relates to interviewing. I just did sit in yesterday on a town hall meeting with our professional association, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, to see what employers might be doing differently as they also navigate this time. And it does seem to think that they are changing some of their recruiting habits, but one of the ones that is really changing during this time is that more interviews are moving to virtual interviews. So when I developed this presentation, I've run this presentation many times, but I did make changes to include more information on how to ace a virtual interview. We're going to be having a virtual interview session on the 31st of March, and I will send information out about that, and it will be, the whole program will be about virtual interviews. So today I'll just touch on it, but we're going to go ahead and get started. You can ask questions throughout the presentation. Do know that this will be recorded and sent out to you. But as you ask questions, I will do my best at the end to answer them. All right. So to get started, what we'll be covering today is kind of the before, during, and after of the interview and things to do to prepare for all three aspects. I also, like I said, added in the virtual interview and stuff to this presentation as well. So we'll start with kind of talking about before the interview or the pre-interview and what to really think about. I always say that your resume will get you the job. Your resume does not get you the interview. Your interview is what gets you the job, and your ability to communicate about your skills and to really help them assess fit. So it really needs to be seen as less about grilling or somebody grilling you about your skills and more as a conversation. For many of you out there, you have this idea of interviews that if they bring you in, they grill you, you leave, they decide if they like you or not. And that's really changing. Most interviews now are moving to more of a conversation because they're getting those questions out ahead of time in either a pre-screening interview or they're getting those questions out in a virtual interview or a taped interview. So once you actually get to an in-person interview or a conversational interview, it really is meant to be a conversation, a two-way conversation. So think of it as, you know, once you're in the door with your resume, you no longer have to be stressed out about your cover letter or resume. We're in a new phase. You know, interviewing is a skill that can be taught and learned. Sometimes people think that they're just not great at talking about themselves or talking them up and they can't change it. I'm going to show you some techniques today on how you can be a better interviewer and how you can essentially learn the 9 types of interview questions that you're going to get and so that you can be ready for any type of interview questions. Your communication skills do matter here, and this is something that you've been preparing for. Some of your Dickinson students out there and what you've been doing in classes have really prepared you, and also, you know, your ability to communicate your skills are really, really important. Okay, so let's talk about interview attire. So before the interview, you need to start to prepare attire. This works for both virtual as well as in-person interviews. So when you're getting your interview attire ready, you want to assess the culture of the organization that you're going in and dress one level up. So for anything in law, consulting, finance, banking, it is pretty standard, kind of no questions asked, that you are going to be wearing a dark suit, whether that be gray, black, blue, solid colors. That is the standard for that field. So you want to make sure that you are in kind of dress your best for those different fields. Obviously, we want you dressing your best for whatever field it is, but if you're going for an interview that is generally a casual environment, you would want to dress one up from that. So that might be a business casual. So you might be wearing a sport coat or a blazer. And so think of it like that. You should never be dressing casual for an interview, even if the site that you're looking at is casual. So here's some other tips here about closed-toed shoes. Try to avoid stripes in both your tie as well as your suit, and I'll explain that why, especially for virtual interviews, why that is important. Before your interview, you want to really know everything you can about the organization. You want to know everything you can about the job. It is pretty important that if you can actually sit down and have a conversation with someone that works there to understand the culture of the organization, you definitely want to do that. You can utilize our alumni fire system and our LinkedIn community to find Dickinsonians that work there. And what I found is our Dickinson alumni base is so helpful with being willing to sit down and do informational interviews with you, to give you some information about that, about the company, about the field, and get you ready for your interview. They might even be willing to do mock interviews with you. That's something that they can say that they're willing to do. So I would really encourage you to reach out to someone that works at the organization prior to your interview. Definitely assess yourself, know your skills. So what we have in our interviewing guide online, and I will send that to you all. In our interviewing guide, we have a page. Let me see if I can try to pull that up. I don't have it up right now. No, I don't have it up. But in our interviewing guide, we have a page that has a list of all the skills that are the most commonly asked skills in an interview. Something that you want to do is you want to go through that ahead of time, and you want to write examples of when you use that skill. That's going to be really important, because before your interview, you're going to have a bank of different skills that they're likely to ask you about, and all the examples that you want to talk about. If you're doing a virtual interview, you want to have that in front of you. If you're doing an in-person interview, you're going to want to have that pretty much memorized, so that you're not using the same examples over and over, so that you're not, finding yourself in a place where you're not, that you don't have an example to give. So that pre-assessment is really, really important. And so I'm going to show you how to decode a job description in a second, so that you can pull those examples out in the right way. So you also want to write down questions for the interviewers. This you can have in a Padfolio and you can bring in with you. I think it's always a good idea when it comes to the question part of the interview that you open up your Padfolio and you say, I have some questions written down. Are you okay if I take some notes? It makes you look interested. It also gets you the information and allows you to write it down so that you can incorporate it into your thank you note later on. And then lastly, decoding the job description so that you know what they're likely to ask. And so right here, I have an example of a job description. I think it is for a social media manager position, kind of a 1 to 3 years out position, could be mid-level, could be entry-level. And so what you're going to want to be doing is looking at all these responsibilities here and coming up with examples of a time that you have done these things. So for instance, the first one is finalize and execute the blueprint of a campaign on social media platforms. So you might be thinking, well, I've never done that. I've never worked in social media, but you've probably used Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. So give me an example of when you've done that. Write that down. You want that example written down. Then you'll see here, set up campaign, credit validation, media allocation, tracking performance. You want to write that down. But then more importantly, you want to jump down to qualification. So in our guide, our interviewing guide, you'll see the most asked skills. But what you really want to do is make sure you're pulling skills out of here that they're asking for. So awareness of pop culture. So that's a skill that they're likely to ask you about. So make sure that you have an example of a time that you were aware of pop culture and that you adapted to that. Proven ability to independently manage multiple priorities. Likely there will be a question then about managing multiple priorities and how do you do that. So you want to make sure that you have written down kind of questions that they're most likely to ask, but then also examples of when they're going to ask, examples of when you've done that in your time. Like I said, if you're doing a virtual interview, you can have those right in front of you so that you can refer to, or a phone interview. If you are doing an in-person interview, you want to commit those to memory and have a really good idea of what that can be. So that was before the interview. During the interview, when you come in, first impressions really do matter. Typically, employers will say that they know within the first 5 minutes whether or not they're going to hire someone. Usually they know that based on their presentation, so how you look, how you shake hands, are you smiling? Are you showing enthusiasm? But then also with the 2 most important questions that you need to have practice over and over. The 2 most important questions that will either get you the job or dismiss you from the job is, tell me about yourself and why are you interested in this position? I practice with students and alumni all the time those questions. And if you can hit those hard, you'll have a really good chance of landing the job as you move forward in your interview. So we're going to talk a little bit about those 2 questions in a second because it is one of our 9 questions and what you want to make sure you're covering in those. So you want to bring a piece of paper, a pen, extra resumes, and a list of references with you because there's likely chance that they did not print out your resume and they will want it. Also, if you've updated anything, it's a good idea to hand them out and say, I've updated my resume. And then the list of references. At the end of the interview, there's a good chance that they will ask you for references. So you want to have those ready if you haven't already given those to them. You want to arrive 10 to 15 minutes ahead of time, but no earlier. If you come earlier to an interview, they will feel pressure to take you earlier. And for many of them, they either have other interviews that are before yours, or they're trying to clean up email, they're in a meeting. And if you come 30 minutes early or even 20 minutes early, they're going to feel pressure to not have you wait, and it's not going to be a good impression. So you want to arrive early. I always say if you're going to a community you're not super comfortable with or an area you're not comfortable with, arrive an hour early, sit in a coffee shop nearby, and get ready so that you can go in. You do not want to be late to an interview. It does not look good. It looks like you didn't plan ahead. So if you don't know where you're going, or you're worried about commuting in, or the train is not super, you're not confident in the train schedule, you want to make sure that you are getting there an hour early and just hanging out in a coffee shop before you get there. Be pleasant and polite to everyone you see. That includes the front desk person at reception. That includes anyone that you're working with through email, because oftentimes those people have the ear of the hiring manager. And so you want to make sure that you are polite and you're easy to work with. They will usually be compensating you for your travel or even booking your travel for you. And so you want to be easy to work with. If you're difficult or push back, that is going to be noted. Stand when the interviewer comes to greet you. Now, this is not the case for a virtual interview, but definitely the case for a in-person interview. So the second they come in to greet you, you want to stand up, you want to shake their hand, give them a firm handshake, and introduce yourself. That is a great first impression. Okay. So this is my part where I've put in some of this material that involves virtual interviews. We have a system that I want to point you to called Big Interview. It is under our subscription page on our website. So if you go to the career development portion of our website, you will see a subscriptions page. And in that subscriptions page, we have a system called Big Interview. What Big Interview is designed to do, it will allow you to practice virtual interviews. Both the two types of virtual interviews that we see most commonly are, the first one is kind of your basic Zoom, Skype, Google Hangout interview that is one-to-one. It almost mirrors and looks like a regular interview, but it is virtually, so there are some things you need to know about. And then the second is your pre-recorded interview. And so your pre-recorded interview is anything that, you know, you get maybe 1 or 2 tries. There's standard questions. Oftentimes there's an AI device that is actually looking at your answers, looking for awkwardness, looking for you know, body language. And so both of these interviews you can practice on Big Interview, you know, especially the pre-recorded ones, because you don't get a lot of time. There's usually a countdown. So if you want to practice those, you can go in there and do that. What's nice about Big Interview too is it does it based on the job that you're going for. So you can put in the job, you can put in the industry, and they will come up with some questions that are typical for your industry. So you know, it's really important that you practice on those. So keys to an amazing video interview. Oh, the one thing I wanted to say is on average, I was looking at data, 67% of employers are using video interviews as a pre-screen. So you're probably not going to get around this, especially now in the next few months. We're going to see more of these. So these are just a few things to be aware of. Obviously, maintaining good eye contact. Where you look and where they see you looking are different. So you need to make sure that you are, you know, maybe even putting a little piece of tape on your camera saying, look here. I see that a lot because that's going to give you eye contact. Looking at their face is going to be awkward. You know, the angle of the camera really matters. And I've noticed that as I've done more Skyping or more Zoom calls with students, that I'm seeing that, you know, I'm shooting up at the ceiling instead of shooting at the ground. So it's making sure that your camera angles are good, which you can practice in Big Interview. Smile, but not too much. Don't overcompensate for being online, but do know that you might come off as a little more flat. Your affect might be flat, especially when you look at different technologies. I don't want to promote one technology over another, and usually it's the employer's choice, so you don't get a lot of say in your technology. I have found Zoom to be the best technology in as far as picking up affect and not having delay. So you know, you want to make sure that if you get a choice, that's the one I recommend going with, but usually you don't. And Skype and Google Hangout are good too. They're just not as good. Control fidgeting and other nervous energy. The reason I recommend this is because, well, obviously it makes you look better, but a big thing is AI technology is picking up on this. And so they can see your communication skills. You're getting scores for this. So if you're bouncing your knee, that might be picked up in your upper body. So just be aware of that and practice kind of talking to a screen. And, you know, I've gotten very comfortable talking to a screen because I do these webinars all the time, but other people are not, especially when they can't see reactions and those sort of things. Optimize your setup. I mentioned before having your resume available, having your questions available, your examples available. You want to make sure that that's all available in front of you, but up high so that you can see it without looking down. They will pick up that you're looking down, so you want to have those pieces kind of set up on a stand level to your eyesight. Your background is really important. So, you know, find a space that is going to work for you. If you are local to Dickinson, you know, the college is closed right now, but in the future, if you're local to Dickinson, we have interview rooms available that will give you an optimized space. Most people aren't local to Dickinson, so you want to just make sure that your background is appropriate, that your background looks good. You want to avoid things in the background, like having a window in the background. That will completely change your lighting, and it will make it hard for them to see you. So dark backgrounds, or a bookshelf in your background is always nice, but you want to make sure your background isn't messy because that will make you look messy. So just be aware of your background. The clothes you wear are important. So you do not want to be wearing light clothes. It washes you out, especially on a camera. I showed a picture here of Stephen Colbert. So things that are distracting are stripes. Stripes are very distracting, and they aren't picked up well on camera. So you want to go with solids, especially for that. Makeup and hair, and even, you know, if you're not someone that is accustomed to wearing makeup, you don't have to wear a lot of makeup, but your skin will shine on camera. So you, just the same way, you know, newscasters and those sort of folks put on some powder. Just be aware of shining. So when you're practicing on big interview, if your face is shining, you might want to put some powder on. And then other distractions, things like pets, kids. You know, actually right now my children are home with me and I could hear them running up and down the stairs, and it's very distracting to me. And my dog is actually right next to me. Thankfully, it's a quiet dog, but you want to eliminate those. You want to remove those from your spaces as much as possible. I've actually been on interviews with candidates that their cat has walked across the computer right when I was doing the interview, and it did not look good. So here's an example of an optimal technical setup as you are looking at this. So you want to really make sure your webcam is good quality. You know, if you're doing a lot of interviewing, you may want to invest in a $30 to $50 webcam rather than using the camera that your computer offers. My camera, my Surface Pro, is very, very good. So you just need to assess that. Everything I've read says get an external camera, but I say assess the one that you do have. Some are better than others. I think MacBooks are pretty good. But if you want something higher quality, you can get a high-end like Logitech camera. You want it higher than your eyes. You don't want it lower looking up. That's not a good setup. You want to make sure that your eyes are level with it, or that you're shooting from above, not from below. It's kind of like when you're taking pictures, shooting from above, not from below is always what you want to go with. I talked about lighting before. Obviously, I'm not promoting that you get a soft light or anything like that, but just be aware right now, I'm in my home office and I have no lights on. I've turned off all lights. I've closed my blinds because lights are very distracting, and so is sunlight. So I would make sure to not have lights on and just use natural faded sunlight if you can. Make sure your internet is strong. You know, this would be the time to invest in the Comcast package with the higher level internet, you know, and not go with the lowest level. You want to make sure that you can run and stream video at almost a perfect pace. Before this webinar, I went and turned off, you know, my children were streaming PBS Kids. I turned that off. I turned off my phone Wi-Fi. I wanted to make sure that all my Wi-Fi was going to this webcast. And so you want to do the same when you're doing an interview. And then obviously do a tech run through. Practice with a friend, you know, that they can leave the house and make sure that it works. If you're close to our campus, you can absolutely come in and use our technology, our web, our internet. Of course, when the college reopens. Right now, we're not open to visitors, so you can't do that, but after the college reopens, for sure. So here is the information. This is on our website. The link is here. I will include it in the materials after the interview. But here is our organization code, so you can get it for free, so that you can go on and practice video interviewing. And there's some good tips too in there. All right, so we're going to move into the interview portion. This interview webcast might be a little longer than 30 minutes today because I had to add in the virtual information because of what's going on. So here are the 9 questions that you're likely to get. And if you can see my coloring here, the first 4 questions, what's unique about those, or not unique, what's similar about these is that they're not giving you the why. So they're not telling you why this is important. They're super open-ended. So it's tell me about yourself. Why should we hire you? What are your strengths and weaknesses? And why are you interested in this position? So these questions are one that don't give you a why. They don't say diversity is important. Tell me your experience in diversity, or problem solving is important. Tell me your experience in problem solving. So what you need to do is answer these three questions using our ABC 1-2-3 model. So our ABC 1-2-3 model is basically answer the question, bring in examples, and connect it back to why this is important. So anything that doesn't give you the why, so if you get a question that doesn't give you the why or tells you what's important, you have to assess what you think is important. So the tell me about yourself. So you're going to tell them about yourself, right? You're going to say, and I'm going to tell you all a little bit about myself right now. My name is Annie. I am Associate Dean at the Center for Advising Internships and Lifelong Career Development. At the center, I'm really involved in doing career advising to students and alumni on all different majors and all different topics. Additionally, I run webinars on different professional development topics and really work with employer relations and making sure that we're connecting our alums to employers. So see what I did there? I'm stopping there for a second. What I did was I answered the question. I told them about myself. I could even go more into my past. I could talk about my previous work experiences, my previous involvement. And then I brought in examples of what I do, such as run the webinars, work with employers. Because if you just leave it to say, well, I have good communication skills, I'm a people person, I have good multitasking skills. If that's all you say about yourself, what you're not doing is giving them a story. You're not bringing in examples. I'd rather have you say, I have excellent communication skills. For example, I deliver a weekly webinar on topics related to professional development. So that is the example. So when you're answering this question, you're answering the question, so you're telling them about yourself, the skills that you have, the experiences you had, and then you're bringing in examples on why you have those skills. If you are answering questions without examples, you are coming off as boring. So it's really important that you bring in stories, you bring in examples, and then connect it back to why this is important. So if I'm saying I'm Annie Condis, I really feel like I have strong communication skills in my position as Associate Dean. I deliver a workshop weekly on professional development over webcast. And in doing that, I've really developed communication skills that can be useful for your organization. I can deliver content both in person as well as through virtual means. So I'm connecting it back to the position. I don't really have a position here I'm applying for, but you're telling them why that's important. You're going to do the same thing with why should I hire you? Why are you interested in this position? So you want to bring in those examples. So it's ABC 1-2-3. The next strategy that we use is the STAR method, which you've probably heard before. It's the most common method for when you're actually given the why. So these are your problem solving, lateral thinking questions. So that might be like a case scenario or content knowledge questions. So if they're asking you things like, I've gotten the question for, what's your favorite theory to use when doing career advising? So that's content knowledge. And the behavior-based questions, the most commonly asked question is a behavior-based question. So the most commonly asked question are things like, tell me about a time that you had to use multitasking to complete a task. So if you're ever getting this question, you want to use the STAR technique. This will bring in examples naturally if you use this technique. So one of the questions here is, tell me about a time where you worked as part of a team. You should be prepared for that question. You should know it's coming because it was probably likely in the job description that you'd be working with a team. So, you want to state the situation and be very specific on the situation. During the summer before my junior year, I was an intern in a senator's office. There were about 3 other interns in the office. Then the task that you had to do. So the interns were charged with putting together a proposal that would help streamline the correspondence between the Pennsylvania residents and the senator's office. So that was the task. And then the action. The action is the action you took, not the action the team took, that you took as part of the team. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but that's where you say what you did to work as part of a team. And then the last one is the R in STAR, which is results. And probably the thing that people most skip in an interview question is what happened. You know, you can say this was the situation, this was the task, this was the action, and what you want to say is the result. So here is the staff implemented our ideas, and we now have an FAQ page and one centralized email address for all questions. So when doing this, why this method works is because you're giving examples, you're telling a story, you're being interesting, and you're saying how that helps. So you're being positive in your answering questions. This will also help you get past just speaking in generalities. So if they say, tell me about a time where you work as part of a team, you do not want to say, oh, I always work as part of a team. You know, I was on the lacrosse team in college, and that was definitely a team work environment. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you are always being specific in your example. So instead, it would be better as, you know, as a student, I was part of the lacrosse team where I, you know, was the goalie on the team, and at this one game, and then you go on being more specific rather than speaking generalities. Strategy 3 are straightforward questions. And then what questions you have for us. So these are questions that are really, really hard to use a strategy for. So that's things like, what salary do you expect? Questions like, when can you start? You just want to make sure we have a list in our booklet of the most commonly asked questions that have things like salary, when can you start, what accommodations would you need, especially if you're like working from home, those sort of things. You want to make sure that you have those written out and that you're practiced with them. We're happy to practice with you through a Zoom call. So that you are saying those things with ease. We do run salary negotiation workshops, and those would be good workshops to attend if you're worried about answering that question. And then what questions do we have for us? You want to always make sure you have questions for them. I recommend for a virtual interview that you have 2 to 3 questions kind of scripted out, but then also have more that you're ready to ask in case they ask you 2 questions and they say, all right, what questions do you have for us? And you're expected to fill up 30 minutes worth of a conversation with questions. So you want to make sure you always have more questions. But after about 2 questions, you want to say, I want to be conscious of your time. I know that you're busy. If I have further questions, can I email you? They're going to say yes. And then you say, well, my last question is, what is the next step in the process? That will indicate to them that you're ready to close down the interview and kind of move on to the closure of the interview. After the interview, it's really important within 48 hours that you send a thank you note, and that thank you note is specific to each person you interview with. So that can be really time consuming and hard, especially if you interview with a lot of people, or if you're doing a virtual interview. Still want to send those for virtual interviews. This gives you a chance to, if you've missed something in your interview, you can put it in there. And so that's really good for especially those kind of scripted out interviews. If you forgot to say something, you might want to put in, you know, I wanted to also mention that I, you know, am strong in this area, if you didn't get a chance to say it. You want to, you know, talk about why you're excited about the opportunity, really reiterate why you're a good fit, and then give your next steps and your contact information to them. So these are some resources that we do have. So I already talked about Big Interview being our main practicing platform. We also offer 1-hour mock interview appointments. If you would like to practice interviewing, we could do that virtually. We could do that through phone. And then also we have our comprehensive interviewing guide, which I will send as part of the wrap up to this session. The other thing that I talked about is using Alumni Fire to connect with alumni that work at different organizations prior to interviews so that you can get a sense of the culture and be ready for what the interview might be like. But also we have our Vault guide, which is on our subscriptions page. You need to go through our subscriptions page, otherwise you won't have all the content. We pay for a membership for you, so you want to go through ours, but it will give you some organizational research as well as information about what interviews are like for that company and organization. A lot of people will use other sites like wetfeet.com, or gosh, I'm blanking on the other website people use. I apologize, but I will send it because it just escaped my mind on what people do, where it's a community where people talk about what interviews are like and what questions to anticipate. With that being said, this was only supposed to be a 30-minute session. I had to add in the virtual stuff, so it was a little longer. I'm welcome any questions that you have. I can answer questions till about 1 o'clock. So if you have questions, feel free to send them through our question portal and I will answer them. So there was a question that just came up about the salary question, and what do you do when you get the question about salary? What are your salary requirements? And so I'll briefly go into a little bit about how to answer that question. If someone asks what your salary requirements are, we recommend that you try to push off that answer as long as you can. And sometimes people really hold your feet to the fire and say, no, we want to know. And so you have to make that decision for yourself. But of how you want to answer that, if you do have a really strict salary requirement that you won't go under. If you're someone that's fairly flexible, then you want to answer that question in a way that is somewhat flexible. So you can say, there's two ways to answer that. So one is you can say, I'm flexible with my salary. I anticipate that you would be offering a competitive salary that's on par with this industry and this type of position. So basically saying to them that you're open for them to offer you something and that you believe that they would offer you fair compensation. If they're saying, no, like, what do you really want? I always recommend using data to back yourself up. So we have a lot of data tools. We have NACE salary surveys. We use salary.com, and we will help you find what that range should be for your position. So you can use data and you can say, well, I looked at data on the salary for this industry and this position in this location. And what I found is that an average position makes anywhere from this to this, and leave it at that. So you're just using data to show that this is the range and that you expect something within this range. But I recommend pushing off that question if you can. Somebody did just answer me on the website that I do recommend using. Thank you, Emily. It is Glassdoor. I cannot believe I forgot that. It's glassdoor.com. That is the site that you could use to get information about what interviews would be like. So someone just asked, how do you avoid making your answers too long at the beginning of the interview or answering a future question? I find that I want to be as comprehensive as possible in case I don't get another opportunity. Yeah, that is tough. For screening interviews, sometimes you only get 5 questions. But what they don't want is anything longer than 2 minutes. Most questions, 90 seconds is what you're going to use to answer those questions. What becomes difficult is when they have 2, 3, 4-part questions. If they ever do a 2, 3, 4-part question, I recommend writing down the parts as they ask you the questions, because you're gonna forget to get to them. And then each of those parts can be about 60 seconds in there. So if you are sticking to the STAR model, that's really will get you to about 90 seconds. So what they don't want you to do is they really don't want to know all the information in that one question. They want to know what they asked, and they want to make sure that you're answering what they asked. So for the tell me about yourself question, you want to make sure that you script that out ahead of time and really hit on the things that are most important. So maybe you want to pick out 3 skills that you want to emphasize that are just really important to that you want to tell them and what you want them to know. Maybe 3 experiences that you have that have shaped who you are and that you want them to know. But yeah, you really want to keep that tell me about yourself to no more than 2 minutes, and most other questions should be 90 seconds. So as you practice them, if you're going over that time, you're probably going a little long. And knowing that there will be future opportunities for you to weave in those really critical examples. But yeah, if you only have 5 questions, sometimes that's hard to do. I hope I answered your question, David. So at this point, I don't see any other questions coming in. I really appreciate you all tuning in to talk about interviewing. I'm hopeful that the economy will stay strong after everything that's going on, and that there won't be a need for people to go out and be doing interviews. But at the same time, I think it's important to equip yourselves with this kind of knowledge and be on your toes for interviewing, because you never know when something's going to come up. We will probably be upping our number of webinars in the future because most of us are working remotely, so stay tuned for that. But otherwise, I appreciate you tuning in and stay well out there. Thank you.